we've done the sound check, so that's excellent. I also wanted to make sure that everybody knows what we're going to try to do here from a format standpoint before we jump in. Going to run through a few slides with you, talk to you a little bit about the Dropbox problem, outline what we can do to help with that problem. Then I also want to be able to take open questions, and those questions we'll take at the end of the webinar. Feel free to type them into the talk or the question window. And we also have, before we get too far into this, a survey, some questions we wanted to ask and get an understanding of where you are and where our audience is as it relates. So we're going to send out a couple of, we have a couple of questions that we're going to use to poll that you'll see in a couple minutes, so please just answer those, and that'll help us get a sense of where the audience is. You should see the poll pop up now on your screen. Excellent. Hey, fantastic. Hey, I love this, watching live poll results. And this one is, are you using Dropbox at work? And yeah, it's looking like 60-40, which is roughly what I would expect. Excellent. It was okay. So with that as a backdrop, I want to jump in. Today, hi, my name is Matt Richards. I am the VP of Products for OwnCloud, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Dropbox problem. I also have Bob Boulay with me to answer questions at the end. He is our senior engineering as it relates to helping out our customers with getting OwnCloud up and running.
Hello all.
And with that, let's move on. So look, let's talk quickly about what we mean when we say the Dropbox problem. It's very simple. Slide 2 here. A Dropbox problem is created when folks at work, right, they just want to get something shared. It's too big. It's too big a file to share, in email, for example. Maybe it's a 30 megabyte file. Email limits it to 2 or 5 or whatever the policy might be. So user A and user B, in the interest of getting their job done, simply go to some, and I say in quotes, Dropbox type solution. It can be some form of cloud solution that's very easy to get. It allows you to share files, and all of a sudden, you've solved the problem. The file is now with user B. You can get at it. It's synced automatically, so you always have the latest file shared with user B. And now you've worked yourselves into what you need to do to get the job done. None of it's necessarily malicious. It's just what happens. But then, often, with very little thought given to things like IT control, so security, governance policies, ownership of the data. A lot of these solutions the data is not owned by whoever uploads the file itself. Users certainly aren't provisioned or deprovisioned when they leave. Quick story on that one. I've been using Dropbox for several years, and I worked at several companies prior to OwnCloud, and inevitably I had either a Google Docs or a Dropbox solution still running, and no one deprovisioned me, so I'm still getting files, still getting updates from those prior companies, and it's just a matter of time before, by accident, that's a file that has some form of sensitive data in it that I'm now getting updates to long after I've left the company. And of course, being friends with everybody who I've shared with on Dropbox and Google Drive at my old company, no one wants to remove me. So that leaves us with essentially a breach in policy and a breach in security for those files that are related to my former roles. None of that's malicious. Certainly don't look at them, but I could. And that's all happens because I wanted to try to share files with external vendors and share files with folks on my team. So that gets us to the Dropbox problem. And again, Dropbox in quotations, not meaning to pick on them specifically. They've created a wonderful market here, but they've also become synonymous with the ability to sync and share easily through a consumer-based cloud service. And essentially, the problem created was created for some very good, compelling reasons, right? It's a huge demand for file sync and share. This is the feature no one knew they needed 5 years ago. Literally did not know you needed it. And now it's the feature that as you see in this, 60% of you guys are using it at work. And the question is why? Well, because it is so easy to get at. It's so easy to use. It's really fast to obtain. And frankly, it just works. You're on your mobile device and you send a file to somebody. You're on your desktop, you're at home, you're at work, wherever it is, and it just works. Unfortunately, of course, at the risk of security. The 60% number is a little bit higher than I've come to see in previous surveys like this, depending, though, anywhere from 20 to 70% of users are using Dropbox or something like it in the company without permission from IT and without perhaps the knowledge of IT, although at this point the knowledge is pretty well spread. It's just a matter of stepping up to it and doing something about it. And that 44% number is something we'll come back to a little bit later. Gives you an idea of how many people are using it at work. And with all the potential issues with these sorts of solutions, from security to control to ownership of data, network, server, storage level access and control, there's many issues facing IT around using these solutions in the workplace. So what is OwnCloud? Well, look, very simply put, for our enterprises who care about this sensitive data leakage we've been talking about via a cloud service of some kind, we deliver a secure file sync and share solution, essentially software, that you put on your servers and your storage inside your data center. We are completely on-site or wherever you choose. Since we're simply providing you with the software, you can put it wherever you want. We can then integrate it in with your infrastructure because we are on-site. We can integrate at the storage level very easily in with whatever storage you might have, whether that's an object store or CIFS or NFS or home directories and Windows or whatever it might be. We can integrate in at the authentication level, of course, with OAuth, LDAP, SAML, whatever it is you might have for authentication purposes, even custom authentication. And we can also then integrate in with infrastructure at the, for example, virus scanning level and at the application level. And last but not least, we're extensible through open APIs and plugins. So if we don't have something out of the box, it's very simple to customize and implement in a matter of even a week integration with an existing non-standard authentication mechanism. Or in other cases, we've worked with a REST-based API backends, and we've been able to extend OwnCloud very easily. A good example of that is being able to use Jive on the back end, the social networking tool. Jive in the enterprise on the back end as a place to store files that are exposed through OwnCloud as just examples of the extensibility. And we do all that while still providing that simple, easy-to-use solution to storing sensitive data entirely in IT's control, but that also provides the end-user experience that users have come to expect from these consumer-grade services. Because let's be honest, if you don't provide that, your end users are not going to they're just going to continue using Dropbox. So, since we're here, let's talk a little bit about OwnCloud, the solution, right? And let's ask the second question in the poll, which is just out of curiosity. You guys know people who are using it despite IT policy to the contrary. We promise this goes nowhere, mostly curious. So take a look at the poll and see how it goes. What do we do to solve this problem? Well, look, the firewall is essentially shifted to the right, and we're running everything behind the firewall inside the data center. So the little cloud in the middle there, that's OwnCloud's application server and database. That is all running inside your infrastructure. And why is that a good thing? Well, now you're in full compliance. In general, what's behind the firewall is already compliant with whatever regulatory guidelines are there. It's completely in accordance with policies around data retention. We can leverage those capabilities. It is protected behind and monitored and managed. And having said that, all of those things, the provisioning issue we talked about before is solved. The storage and service user provisioning solved. Governance, security concerns, integration with single sign-on, all solved. And we do that by putting this behind your firewall. So at the highest level, that's what makes us different. And that's how we solve this Dropbox problem we've been talking about. So what does it consist of? Well, we've got the server in the middle. That's really the brains of the operation, if you will. And then on the one hand, we have iOS and Android apps to access, download, edit, upload files that have been shared with you or your own files on those devices. And then we also have Windows, Mac, and Linux desktop clients that sync with the server automatically. So a file updated on the desktop is automatically pushed and accessible on the other access points. And what we sell and what we offer as a company, we offer subscriptions, which really covers three things. That means you will, of course, get the support associated with a subscription. maintenance, patches, updates. You'll get access to folks like myself for influence on the product. And last but not least, for access to tools, proprietary software that we build to help make managing and installing and integrating OwnCloud easier, as well as access to our license. We have a proprietary license possibility. Well, OwnCloud is open source. We own the copyright to the code and can license it to you under commercial terms so that it can be operating in your environment under your control with changes you make that do not have to be open source. And naturally, we've also found a number of options around consulting. If you're installing OwnCloud, working with OwnCloud, customizing OwnCloud, we do provide help building plugins. We help install and integrate OwnCloud in your environment, and of course, helping it scale and perform effectively and configuring the environment to that effect. We are an annual per-user price-based system. That means, more information, of course, feel free to reach out, but we do annual-based, essentially a subscription pricing. As we dig into the subscription value, right, we talked about this briefly in the last slide about support, influence, and tools. Clearly, the support side of it is usually well understood. The influence side is access to roadmaps, features, functions, influence over where we're going as a product line, and also we can act as a conduit to our community, our open source community, which, by the way, at this point, as an aside, we're looking at well over 120 participants in that active online community, very active and growing extremely quickly in the open source side of OwnCloud. Which is a healthy community, of course, making it providing the source of a lot of what we're providing you through OwnCloud and our ability to support that. And then on the tool side, we talked about the proprietary software and the copyright license, and we also certify the distribution. So we have the OwnCloud Enterprise Edition, which is a certified release of the OwnCloud software, and is certified and QA'd and released independent of the community edition of OwnCloud, and has this proprietary software included. And that's what we support, the Enterprise Edition. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about how OwnCloud works and how we solve your Dropbox problem a little bit more specifically. In the middle, really have the server piece, and this is where you can monitor, and you can control OwnCloud from here. On the left side, your storage, in which you can protect. This is whatever storage you might have as primary storage, where OwnCloud by default puts every file on the left side. And then we also have optional secondary storage, we call it, where you can add additional on-site storage, connectors to things like Jive or Windows Home Directories, CIFS-based backend storage. We can also connect through to hybrid solutions like Rackspace or S3 if you want to use Amazon storage. So from a storage perspective, we have that, and then we have an abstraction layer that's managed by the server, so that all appears to the end user like it's a single file location. It appears through the file sync and share solution on the right, as if it's web browser based, all in one location, simple to access, simple to sync, simple to use solution, and that all the complexity, of course, being hidden underneath the covers on the left. And we've talked briefly about the ability to extend OwnCloud. Out of the box, here are some examples of the sorts of apps you can add to OwnCloud, and then there are many, many, many more. But the LDAP and Active Directory or virus scan apps. On the virus scan, you upload a file, it gets scanned. If it's got a virus in it, you can set what you want the server to do if there's a virus detected. As the administrator, we can use versioning of software and versioning of files, as they're uploaded. New versions with the same name are simply the old version saved, a new version is put in its place, and you can access those versions through the interface. There's encryption apps for AES 256 at rest encryption, text editors for live text editing through the web browser, OAuth authentication, SAML authentication, and much, much more. And I put your app here just as an example, because if there's something you want to do that isn't currently offered, it is very simple to start and build an app to do something unique and different. And that's really how the architecture comes together. A little bit more specifically, you have your core OwnCloud server and a bunch of APIs around the outside and this storage abstraction layer. So your primary storage, honestly, it could be anything on the left side. It could be NFS through to whatever you can mount on your server we can use. And we also have the ability, all this secondary storage, some of this can be primary storage, or it can be accessed as secondary storage, which means you can choose to put files into, say, your CIFS server, and also have, by default, everything going to your NFS server, as an example. And the storage abstraction layer makes, like I said, all of it look like it's the same through the web interface. We have a logging capabilities. You can integrate OwnCloud with, for example, Splunk or whatever your SIM solution might be, so that you can attach alerts to the appropriate activities, to the appropriate warnings being offered by OwnCloud. And that's fairly complete all the way down to the individual user has shared a file. There is a logging app we provide as part of the Enterprise Edition that gives extensive logging mechanisms for, X user logged in, X user logged out, X user shared a file with Y user, and you can monitor all of that and set alerts for any of those things. We have a metering API, which is an extension of the provisioning API, and allows you to see who's used how much of their quota. We have reporting capabilities. The provisioning API is an external way for you to add users, remove users, and take action on those users. We have standard access protocols, either HTTPS for the front end, the web browser interface, or standard, we use WebDAV for accessing OwnCloud files, and so standard WebDAV access provided by OwnCloud, and it's something that all of our clients use, so it's fully functional. We have the ability to do themes inside OwnCloud, so you can easily white label or brand OwnCloud so it looks like it's your solution. And then we have the sharing API, which is the ability to externally control sharing files inside OwnCloud. An API for, I think we call it the capability API, for telling you what apps are active on the server. For example, SAML is turned on, so all authentication is being done over SAML. So for this server, then you must use SAML authentication. And then the internal application API, which is how you build the apps and add extensions that are out of the box from OwnCloud and enable them. So at a slightly more detailed level, that's how the server is architected. Let me see. Okay, so if you're going to deploy OwnCloud in the very basic form, OwnCloud is an end-to-your web application, and it's the simplest and fastest way to describe what it is. So you'll have a load balancer out front, most likely, 2 or more app servers, either for failover reasons or for just for redundancy reasons. You could have many, many more. You'll have a database cluster of some kind, typically MySQL, could be Oracle, could be Postgres, could be Microsoft SQL Server, whatever you choose. And then on the back end, you'll have your storage, your primary storage, and if you choose, secondary storage also connected in. And when you deploy OwnCloud, it scales very simply with additional app servers up front, or node management nodes in the database, or capacity for storage on the back end. So overall, it looks and acts and feels a little bit like the web applications that you're running today in terms of its capabilities, and it's fairly straightforward to manage and to scale, and even to replicate between sites. So you could have a disaster recovery, second site where you are using your infrastructure to mirror this to a secondary site in case of failure. Typically, that's how our customers are deploying it, and this can be in a physical or virtual environment. It can be in a private cloud if you so choose. It can be on, obviously on physical servers, and just about anything in between. Okay, so real quick, what does it do? Well, we talked quickly about how you can put it in your data center. You can store OwnCloud on, you can use whatever storage you might have. You integrate with existing elements like your LDAP or Active Directory server via plugins. Again, you can extend the capabilities with additional apps or build your own, and it provides you basic sync and share that you would expect to help you solve that Dropbox problem and provide your users that Dropbox-like experience. Stuff we also like to talk about, but it's sometimes hard to find a place to talk about from a feature standpoint. File undelete, versioning and rollback. It's the things you would expect. You have a file, you delete it by accident, now you can undelete it, you can version it, and you can roll back to previous versions without a lot of trouble. This external storage, this is what we call secondary storage mounting. You can mount secondary storage from a variety of different sources and more. Some of them are listed here. So you could, for example, as a user of OwnCloud at home, I happen to have Google Docs syncing through OwnCloud to my desktop using the OwnCloud desktop client, the OwnCloud server as a gateway to Google. All the files are still stored in Google, but they're synced to my desktop. And my server only acts as a proxy, as a single point of access to those files, in addition to everything I have stored in OwnCloud. We support just about everything from an enterprise database standpoint, so you can use Oracle or MS SQL Server. Postgres, so we use Doctrine as an abstraction layer there. We have the logging module, which we talked about, for extensive logging. So this is the whole, I shared it with you, logging, as well as who logged in and who logged out of the system, and who changed what files and where did they come from. Sharing and provisioning APIs we touched on, the ability to externally share files from, for example, the desktop or mobile apps, which is coming in OwnCloud 6, as well as the ability to provision users, which already exists in OwnCloud today. And then the ability to white label it. So what do you do with it? I mean, that's great. So you have this great private file sync and share solution. You can file sync and share stuff. What do I want to, well, okay. What are users actually doing with it? Well, on the one hand, the obvious one, and here's just an example of universities who just love having their own on-site file sync and share solution, so that faculty and students and staff can sync and share data and essentially provide that Dropbox-like experience without worrying about violating various regulations over student data, for example. It's entirely in their control, entirely on campus, so performance is greatly improved, and their their access to the internet is the bandwidth requirements are somewhat reduced because you're no longer syncing everything with Dropbox, you're syncing it locally. So this is one area where we're seeing a lot of use of basically just providing a private file sync and share, whether universities, enterprises, etc. Examples of how people are integrating it. We have service providers who come and want to use OwnCloud, and even some enterprises that are using OwnCloud to integrate with some form of custom user directory. They might have some login capability that's not standard LDAP or Active Directory, or for whatever reason they can't provide access to a standard LDAP or Active Directory. So there's some custom user login and authentication mechanism, no problem. Some form of custom backend storage, maybe REST-based storage, no problem. We've done this. And also then some way of sharing custom metadata so that we can track some property of this files as they sync and make sure that that is in fact also integrated into the solution, no problem. An interesting flexibility one. So there are folks who want to take some form of scanning, right, and adding that into the OwnCloud workflow. So you could think of that as like a DLP web service call. Upload a file, and every time it's uploaded, it gets sent to the DLP, gets a grade back from the DLP, and then that solution dictates whether or not somebody can share that file or whether or not somebody has access to that file. And of course, the other one is just very common. People take OwnCloud, they white label it with their own brand, they makes it look like it's coming from them, and then they offer that out to end users. There's a number of different ways people are using it. So just to wrap up and get on to questions, because I've seen a bunch of these go by. First off, urgent the Dropbox problem, that 44% number I used. 44% of folks who in the enterprise are using Dropbox without IT's knowledge. And that seems a little low relative to what the poll came in at. 63% in our poll here said Dropbox is being used in our last poll by employees despite an IT policy to the contrary. And we've heard this story before. It may be that that Dropbox gets blocked at the firewall, but a lot of folks then switch over to the guest network or a 3G card and then continue using Dropbox. It's or something like it. So, an interesting poll here. Only 38% said, in fact, they're not aware of folks who are doing that. So, OwnCloud, this combination of on-premise and open source allows us to be flexible. We integrate in with your infrastructure and also in with your security policies and your security tools. We deliver it behind the firewall, drops into your data center or wherever you choose to put it, whether that's your data center or a data center you lease. Integrates with and extends existing infrastructure. It's extensible, as we talked about, and it still gets you that Dropbox-like user experience. So to that end, I want to start taking some questions. I just need to pop open this window, start looking at questions. You guys take a look. Is there a good one?
Yes,
Bob,
I've been answering some of these folks privately.
Oh, good.
So for those of you that you may hear your question repeated, and I have certainly responded to you privately. So the first question that came up, and this is more of a business question more than it is a technology question, but Matt, I thought it would be a good opportunity to discuss some of the ways to engage with OwnCloud. One of the questions is consulting available on a non-per-user pricing basis. And I talked a little bit in my response about both setup and implementation and customization, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about how that works.
Sure, ways to engage OwnCloud. So there's a couple ways to do it. There are one, of course, we'd be happy to. You can always connect with us at any time. info@owncloud.com if for some reason something's unanswered here today, or you see something or have questions. And then typically what we'll do with you is we'll work you through just getting a pilot up and running, and we have some guidance and some best practices on a small level pilot implementation kind of thing. And then once you get through that, we'll get to, all right, so given that experience, what can we do for you from a consulting perspective, a plugin that might meet a specific need you have, in addition to what's out-of-the-box functionality with OwnCloud. We'll often do that, and we or a partner of ours will connect with and be able to help with that. And then we push that through to pilot and then scale the deployment from there. And, of course, I'm looking at Bob saying, and you know this, Bob, because 9 times out of 10, you're part of that first or second or third call. So.
And I think that the person's individual question is that can be decoupled from or separated out from their subscription costs. So their subscription is sort of one agreement with us, and then there's also some consulting that we can do with them around customization of the product, setup, installation, things of that nature.
Absolutely. And what happens a lot, especially when I talk about influence, is there's a feature or function you need very often, although not all the time. If that feature or function makes sense for OwnCloud, what we'll do is we'll create it or we'll pull it forward in the roadmap, and then that'll become part of the core product, and then if you so choose, to become part of the core product and then part of your subscription going forward.
That's excellent. The next question that I've got here that I think is interesting, is OwnCloud able to protect data stored in the primary storage from insiders? And I thought, Matt, this might be a good opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about our file-based encryption application.
Mm-hmm. So we do have what we call, well, as Bob said, it's our file authentication, or our file encryption mechanism. It's an AES 256 plugin, and you have the choices of how you configure it. And what it essentially does is once the file hits the application layer on OwnCloud on the server, it is encrypted to AES 256 standards and then stored encrypted on the back-end storage. And then as the administrator, you can decide, is there an admin recovery key or not, depending on the scenario. There shouldn't be one, or maybe there should be one, and that's up to you. And then your passphrase is yours, the user's only, and that's how you unlock those keys, which is then, in turn, how you unlock and unencrypt the files when you share them. And it's worth saying that this file that's encrypted when you upload it to your own account is, of course, just encrypted to your keys. But if you share that file with somebody else on the system, the file is then encrypted with their public keys as well. So you can really limit and ensure that through OwnCloud, only those folks who have access to, who actually have the private keys that you've encrypted their public key, the file with their public keys, have access to and can see that file and unencrypt it and make use of it. And that's a pretty key part. It's not just about encrypting it at rest for yourself. It's also encrypting it at rest for yourself so that those who want to see it and access it have access to it. Which brings up really a second point, which isn't really about encryption, but it is around access privileges. And we have a feature in OwnCloud we call CRUDs, the create, read, update, delete, share capability. When you share a file with somebody, you can set their permissions. And at the time of sharing a file or a folder, up to you, you can set, can they create something new in that folder? Can they read? That's by default, because of course you can read it. Can they update this file? Are they allowed to delete this file from the server? And can they reshare this file with somebody else? And you can set all that granularly yourself, or by default, of course, full privilege access set up for the owner of the file when they share it with somebody. So just another layer. It's not really encryption, but it's another level of control over files.
Excellent. And Matt, I think we're getting this question a couple of times, and maybe you could spend a little bit of time talking about the difference between Community and Enterprise Edition.
Yeah, great question. It's often asked, and with the Community Edition, it is an open source license. You have access to the core OwnCloud server plus over 100 community apps that have been built by the community. And then you also have access to the desktop sync clients on these platforms, and you have access to the Android app only. So that's all good, and that until at some point is you want some advice or you want some support or you're having trouble, or there's a number of proprietary features that we have that are only available in the Enterprise Edition. So when you work with the Enterprise Edition, first, when you get it, we release the Enterprise Edition with an extensive amount of quality control on top of it. So what we're doing is we take the Community Edition and we spend months QAing the Community Edition to turn it into the Enterprise Edition. And so you'll see OwnCloud 6, for example, Community Edition is out shortly in alpha, but you won't see it as an Enterprise Edition for a couple of months or more. Then on top of the difference from that perspective of just the time it takes to harden something, you also see on top of that a number of apps. So, for example, the logging apps I talked about, the administrative logging as well as access and file logging, those are only available to enterprise users. We have also the provisioning API where you can make external calls into OwnCloud that are only available to enterprise users. We have also support for things like the Oracle database is really only an enterprise feature. We then, on top of that, have a couple of other.
Well, for those Windows shops, and Matt, I apologize for
sure.
it, but the mounting of home directories.
Yes.
So, the automation of mounting of home directories through attributes in your LDAP or Active Directory server.
Correct. And that's also an enterprise-only feature. And then in OwnCloud 6, there'll be a bunch of others. Stay tuned for that. But there's a number of other additional features on top of the core OwnCloud. And the goal here really is for the community to have a core, fully functional OwnCloud that makes a lot of sense for them to use. But then there's enterprise-only features on top of that, and the level of quality demanded in the enterprise environment requiring a whole other level. And that's what the subscription gets you to the Enterprise Edition. It gets you the support we've talked about. It gets you the patches and the updates and the maintenance capabilities. It gets you the influence over the roadmap. It gets you the software that we just talked about. And last but not least, it gets you the license. So we do have the copyright for the core bits of OwnCloud, owned by and assigned to OwnCloud, the company. So if somebody has and wants to deploy OwnCloud, very often an enterprise has strict policies about who can contribute code back to an open source from their company. But what they don't mind it being out there, they just can't contribute it directly. So having this copyright on our part allows us to assign a license to an enterprise that allows them to make changes to it and then decide whether or not they want those changes to go back to the community rather than have it be required that they go back to the community and work through OwnCloud to get those changes back to the community or not at their discretion. And usually that comes in most handy when an enterprise needs to make some form of customized something. So they have some policy or some back-end integration that's really unique to them and starts to show just a little bit too much to the outside world about how they operate internally. And they want to keep that proprietary, so they can.
Cool. Well, I think we got time for 2 more questions. And I think this first one, Matt, is a little bit, because we got a lot of questions that sort of danced around architecture and how to set up OwnCloud and the best way to set up OwnCloud. So maybe give a quick overview of the OwnCloud architecture.
Sure. And let me also let me go back up to, just for fun, there's a good slide to start at here. So OwnCloud typically, it is a PHP-based web app. So pick the web server. We support, well, we prefer Linux, of course, for various performance reasons as it relates to PHP, although it will operate on IIS and we can support you. We prefer Linux. And then on top of that, Apache, typically the app server running with PHP installed. And then you drop the OwnCloud code onto the server and you have yourself the app server on the left side here, one of those app servers. And if you're going into a pilot, that might be enough. You have an app server and maybe the database is running on it, or maybe you have a separate database. And that database for OwnCloud stores metadata. It stores information about users. It stores information about which apps are enabled and what they're configured, and it has something called the file cache in it, which is really it stores the information about the storage abstraction layer that we've talked about as part of OwnCloud. So architecturally, there's the server and the database server, those 2 pieces, and then whatever storage you choose to connect. And at its most basic level, you can put all that on one. On our website, for example, we have a virtual appliance that has all that in one. You can run that for a few users, no big deal. That's what I happen to do at home on an old Athlon 2400 plus single-threaded CPU. It's ancient and it works fine. But if you really want to scale, that's when we start breaking those 3 pieces out. We break the app server out from the database server and put storage on a separate entity. And then we might add out front a load balancer, which then allows you to have 2 app servers and maybe multiple database servers and then additional storage on the back end. And it scales from there.
Okay, beautiful. And then I think the last question here is around integration, Matt. I think that we've got a couple of questions peppered through here around integrating with our existing storage, and how do we integrate with our existing, user directories. So maybe talk a little bit about those two items specifically.
Sure. So let's say you have Active Directory LDAP installed as the most common of the two most common directories. And if you have one in existence, when you set up OwnCloud, you'll notice there's an app called the LDAP Active Directory app. And you go in, so when you log into OwnCloud for the first time, you go into the admin panel. If you're the administrator, when you first set it up, you log in as the administrator. That's the admin account. And in there, you'll be able to enable the LDAP and Active Directory account. And there is a simple set of basic, advanced, and then expert-only tabs that you can use to configure your connection to one or more LDAP or Active Directory servers that are then used to populate OwnCloud's user database. And you can also then not only connect and authenticate, which is really just a yes/no back from the LDAP when you log in, yes or no, this password is correct. You can actually go beyond that, of course, and pull group memberships. You can pull quota. You can pull additional information based on filling out those advanced and expert tabs to make sure that OwnCloud is properly integrated in with your directory, and that you're managing your users in one central location, typically your directory, and then OwnCloud is just leveraging it. And then storage. So it depends a lot about what kind of storage you might have. So the integration with storage is straightforward. The easiest way to do this is if you're running a Linux server, for example, and you can mount whatever storage you want through the operating system, OwnCloud will use it. That's the easiest way to do it. Then on top of that, we have other options. We have the ability to mount, for example, as many of you may know, you can't really mount an object store natively into an operating system. So we have REST-based integration. In that case, it's an app that you have to enable, and then you can connect to S3 or Swift-based file stores on the back end. And then there's a number of things in between. We talked about Jive, for example. That's an app. You enable the app, and you use the REST API to connect to Jive. There's a number of other options for ways to connect to OwnCloud, but those are the primary ones we run across most of the time. And the last one, actually, is that Windows Home Directory mounts. So if you have, like a lot of companies, you have home directories for users out there on a server, and you want to see those in OwnCloud, you will simply, as the administrator, you enable this app, and you configure it to point to your Windows Home Directory server or servers, and then the users will see their existing home directories mounted inside of OwnCloud. Even though all the files stay back on the Windows Home Directory server, or excuse me, the Windows Home file server, they appear in OwnCloud as if they're residing on the OwnCloud server. I think that covers that.
Yeah, I think it does. And now what I'll say, guys, is that any questions that didn't get addressed here, you will get a follow-up. There was a number of questions with regards to things like pricing, which obviously would be very specific to your individual scenario, and a couple of others questions in there that, again, are fairly specific to individual scenarios. That we will reach out to you directly, through our account managers, and make sure that we get any and all questions answered and any technical issues buttoned up for you. And I also know that we are recording this, so if you want to see a replay of this, it'll be available on our website, within the next couple of days. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to sort of wrap up. Anything in closing?
Absolutely. So let me bring us back to the end of the slides here, and just say, hey. Well, you have an ongoing webinar series going on. We would be happy to have you join us for our next one if you are aware of and use Jive. I would like to see how you can extend Jive with the whole file sync and shares experience and have that all under your control, managed by you and hosted by you. Feel free to join us. There's the bit.ly link to register for that webinar. And, of course, you can always see replays of this webinar and others, as you can see listed here at owncloud.com/webinars. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we look forward to reaching out to those of you whose questions we didn't answer, and thanks for your time.